Welcome back to another edition of the WYO Business Spotlights. More and more people are tuning in, and I love that. If you take a second to drop a comment in the comment space below, like and subscribe. You can find us everywhere you are. I mean, we're on all the social media platforms. We're on Spotify now. If you listen to audio podcasts only, there's also video on Spotify as well. But you can find us on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram. So. Let us know you're out there. Tell us how you're enjoying these podcasts. And if you have any suggestions of who I should bring on, let me know. And without any further ado, I want to welcome my guest. Thank you, Amber, for joining us today.
Sure, glad to be here.
We're going to get into a lot of things. We don't have 2 or 3 hours, but we're not going to make this into a Joe Rogan podcast of 3 hours. But I want to get into obviously your backstory, your business ventures, and then your role on city council, and then what's happening in Cheyenne, which is important to all of us, whether we're on city council, whether we run a business or not. It's important to all of us. So.
Right. Yeah.
So let's talk about Backwards Distillery. So talk about how that whole thing transpired. How did you take your ideas to getting into business to where you're at today?
Yeah, so this idea came to us. It's my family. It's a family business, and we thought of this idea. Must have been 13 or so years ago now. Around the dinner table. Really rolling around the idea of starting a business together for some time, and just a little bit, unclear about what direction that might take. But we wanted it to be something that we all had some passion for, some interest in, and a variety of different ways that we could apply our different, skill sets and backgrounds to an industry that ended up being new for all of us. Actually, the distilling industry was something that none of us had experience in, but I think what I really tie it back to is our love of travel and food and beverage, and that's sort of what I think was the hook for us in that industry. Is it felt like a way to bring something new in food and beverage back to our community. We had the great fortune of being able to travel quite a bit as a family, and that was always centered around eating and drinking delicious things, and so wanting some of that at home, I think, was a big driver for us and a reason why this particular idea kind of stuck and became the thing that we ended up pursuing. So, that was 13 or so years ago. We were all in different jobs, and we decided to pursue this. Took better part of 2 years to get up and going from the time we decided, yes, we're starting, till the time we were able to open our doors and put a product out to the market. So a lot of complications that are inherent to the industry around licensing and regulation, around equipment, availability and sourcing, and it was just a big project. So it took quite a long time to do, but we opened in 2014. So just celebrated our 10-year anniversary in November of last year, and since that time have, as you said, taken that idea that was in our head and brought it into the real world, which is a really interesting and a very cool thing when you think about it. Like all the ideas you have, that one was the one that now is real life and exists, and people can come and enjoy it with us. And
absolutely,
it's a really cool thing. So the process was long. It involved a lot of education for us because, as I said, we were not from that industry, and so we had to do a lot of background research and a lot of understanding not just the process but the equipment necessary and the suppliers that exist and what the supply chain looked like, and all those sorts of details that went into actually being able to go into production. Once that was kind of all done, there was that side, kind of the nuts and bolts logistics side, and then there was bringing the brand to life and really kind of putting our stamp on that, the way the brand would look and interact with people, and the space we would create around the brand, and so that was sort of the other part, the more creative part of the process that we probably enjoyed more than the nuts and bolts stuff. But
I have to admit that I am a huge fan. My drink of choice is the absinthe. I have to announce that because it's just something that's important. Because for people that know, I lived in France for 25 years, and France has a lot of great qualities in terms of food and beverage. That's probably about it. But and my wife obviously.
Sure. Okay.
But besides that, they are they do make the ananas drink like your absinthe, and so when I first tried yours, I was like, this is really good, and so it's been my go-to. I've put away my French habits of drinking the enjoying the absinthe drink, the Ricard, and different drinks that they have over there. Yours is really good. Really good. The profile, the notes that you can enjoy, the smell, everything, the how long it lasts. It's an amazing product, and I'm interested to know, because as a fanboy, how long have you actually put out this absinthe product? Has it been there since the very beginning?
It has not been there since the very beginning. That one really was a labor of love. It was a very initial inspiration for us, absinthe as a category. My brother, who's our distiller, is very intrigued by that category and the lore around it and sort of the mystique of it, and the flavor. We like the flavor too, but that it's a difficult spirit to make, and also one that's a bit niche. There are certainly fans out there.
It's an acquired
to
taste,
find,
for sure.
right? But it's not something that a lot of people drink regularly and go through any volume of. And so in terms of what to lead with, our lights probably would have been turned off long ago if that was our first thing that we put out to market, just because of it's kind of the size of that.
So my purchases are not keeping you alive.
Well, they are helping. They absolutely help. Everything helps. But I think leading with that could have been a mistake, particularly because it is a little more niche. If that's the first thing anybody ever tried from us, they might be like, "Whoa, this is weird stuff," So we started with some more kind of mainstream SKUs early on: vodka, gin, rum, those sorts of things. But always absinthe, because it was sort of part of our origin story. It was always in our minds, somewhere in a phase of R&D for a good many years, until we were able to finally get to the point where we were ready. We liked what we had created and were ready to put it out to the market. There's a lot of pressure on that one because we had been telling this origin story for, I think it was maybe 6 or 7 years into the business before we put that product out. And so everybody kind of knew it was part of our story. And so actually saying like, okay, well, here it is, was that was a scary one to launch for sure, because we felt like we had built up the expectation quite a bit.
Right. Well, I'm glad you kept it going, and I'm glad it's available. 10 years is quite a milestone. 5 years is that first milestone. A lot of businesses, have to hit that before they feel like they've hit some level of success, and 10 years, a decade, is definitely a strong milestone for you and what you've done, what your family has done in this area. So congratulations on that. Has the current marketing, the current approach, because you have a clear circus theme as well, has that been there since the very beginning, or has that evolved?
That was established right from the jump, in our name and in our initial branding for kind of the core flagship line. That came from, as we were thinking about how do we brand this, what brand story are we trying to tell. We wanted something that was related to our family, because it's a family business, of course, but wanted something a little more interesting and creative than like Pollock Family Spirits or whatever. And so we along with our travels, food and beverage, we were traveling extensively during our childhood to see Cirque du Soleil shows. We caught a Cirque du Soleil bug kind of early on in one of our first family vacations together, and that became kind of an annual, like, where are they now, what show is playing, and getting tickets to go see that. And that evolved into, actually after I saw my first one, I immediately went to the gift store and bought juggling balls and started teaching myself how to juggle, which turned into unicycle and turned into a variety of different circus things. My brother and I went to circus camp, and so it just became sort of a hobby, all amateur level, like nothing that elevated beyond just the front yard and having fun. But we just thought it would be an interesting way to kind of put our family, something that was important to our family, our stamp on it, and also something that a lot of people share, an experience that people have had. There's a lot of nostalgia around it. There's a ton of history, sights, sounds, colors, smells. It's a very rich aesthetic, so there's a lot to draw from. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very glad that's what we chose as one of the sort of creative people who has to continue to keep the brand fresh and growing and delivering new things to people. It's very helpful to have a deep well to pull from in terms of inspiration for that. And so we continue to reflect that theme in our packaging and in our spaces, our physical spaces that we've created. Mm-hmm. Our drink names are all derived that way. A lot of our sort of brand voice is related to that as well. And so, it's been there from the beginning, and it just continues to kind of grow because it feels like a relatively endless pool of inspiration to draw from. So,
thanks for watching today. These podcasts are powered by PayRock, and PayRock is a payment solutions provider. We work with any size business or nonprofit, improving those payment acceptance efficiencies while reducing those overall costs. You can get a hold of me through any one of those social media channels, or you can give me a call. Let's get back to that podcast. Another thing that I really enjoy is the concept around the tasting room or the lounge that you have. I think that there's a lot of crossover with the artisanal or the craft breweries here in town in the sense that you're focusing on something else besides just the drink. The drink is obviously important, but it's about the conversation. It's about the exchange of ideas. And I'm really fond of that because that's the old world traditions I think that we've lost in America and that we're coming back. They're definitely in Renaissance here in America, again, where we can have whether it's an artisanal beer or a craft cocktail, that it's there as a means to an end, to a conversation, to an exchange. And I love that. I love that about the tasting room. It's not about it's not a pub, it's not a tavern, it's not with the darkened windows. Maybe your windows are dark, but there's definitely an ambiance that you see when you go into a tavern. This is not a tavern, and I really enjoy that. And that's, for me, that's part of the marketing as well, because you're communicating something else besides just the drinks.
Yeah, we put a lot of thought into the experience overall. We want it to be a place where people can come interact with our spirit. Obviously, that's primary reason for it existing. And in order to do that, it has to be a place where people can hear and listen and learn and chat with one another and respond to what they're trying. And I think from that flows this experience that we curate the music. We don't have TVs. It's meant to be a place where conversation can happen and where people can have an experience that is more than just I had several cocktails tonight. Whatever. Right. It's meant to be memorable in a different way. And so we put a lot into that environment, and that's very intentional. Like we don't exclude TVs just because we don't like to make money on game days. Like, we do it specifically to create a certain culture and a certain environment in there.
And the jazz nights are part of that too, I'd imagine.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's great. How have you seen the distillery scene evolve over the past 10, 12 years that you've been doing this?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. When we first entered the market, I think we were a distillery 280 something in the country, and there's well over 3,000 distilleries at this point. 10 years in, it's more than 10x, and that coupled with a variety of other kind of influences created definitely a change in what we saw in craft distillation early on, where brands were able to get a broader foothold across multiple states and really grow quite a bit. It's now pretty regionalized and to a great degree, many distilleries are distributed predominantly in their home state. So it's quite a localized phenomenon, which is not a good or bad thing. It just is how it's sort of shifted. There's a high degree of consolidation at the middle tier, the distribution tier, which has sort of necessitated that circumstance as well, which makes things like the tasting room all the more critical for distilleries like mine and really most other craft distilleries in the country to sort of have that physical footprint where people can come and interact, and really is then about those experiences as much as it is about the bottle and what's in
Right,
it.
right, absolutely. But you have expanded quite a bit. I mean, I think we spoke about this a couple of years back when we were talking about different things, and you talked about your distribution levels. Talk to us a little about where you're at, because you're obviously a local business here in Wyoming. You're a Casperite, business. I think you're distilleries and mills, but you're local in Ventura County. But where are you at in the U.S.? And I think you also have a distribution in overseas. I think it's in Taiwan.
Yep.
I don't speak Taiwanese, so I couldn't understand everything. But talk to us about where you're at besides Casper.
Sure. So we are in Taiwan through the work with the Wyoming Business Council and their trade partnership with Taiwan. That was sort of the mechanism that allowed us to start exporting. Otherwise, I really don't think we would have attempted to do that. Export is complicated, and spirits are highly regulated, as you can imagine, and taxed in various complicated ways. And so it's difficult to do. And so I don't think we would have made that attempt. But we really value that relationship. It's been a really great experience. I just had a meeting with Taiwan last night, 7 p.m. our time. So it changed your business day up quite a bit when you're exporting. But
Sure.
Great stuff there. Really cool and interesting to see our products being enjoyed in a different country. We have distribution in Colorado that has fluctuated over the years. That's been our longest out-of-state market. And actually beyond that, it's really kind of contracted through a variety of circumstances. COVID is the sort of the catalyst that caused us to pull out of California. We had a distributor, as I alluded to earlier, distributor consolidation, had a distributor merger in Nevada that booted us off the ticket, and so to a large degree we've consolidated and tried to really focus. Colorado, we've got a great distributor there who's works hard for us, and we have a good kind of more personal relationship with him, and so it's kind of over the years has evolved to be like, let's really just focus and cultivate the things that are working best for us, and the thing that isn't working best is trying to push too far. And I think that's a story we've seen reflected across a lot of companies, sort of in our tier of the industry.
So are you in many states right now, or can you find your products in how many states across the U.S.?
Just the two now. So
Okay.
Wyoming and Colorado.
As distributors, but they distribute to other places.
Yeah,
All right.
just in their own states.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay. So going back to the fact that you're a small business that's becoming a medium-sized business, I would imagine, or talk to us about volume. So, talk to us about what do you produce on in a given period? Are we talking thousands of gallons? I mean, where are we at?
Yeah, I mean, typically in the liquor world, we measure in cases. So thousands of cases. But yeah, again, I mean, I would say the growth in this industry is interesting. It's quite slow for small businesses and businesses that are positioned like ours. There are other companies that you'll see where they're venture capitalists funded and they're burning cash to explode volumes and then typically sort of fizzle out and are done. Ours is much more sort of that like legacy, slow growth, like let's keep building products and building a base organically. And so, certainly volumes are not exploding. The ways we see volume increases is by, typically levers that we pull, which would be to say, let's introduce a new category, a new product to a market. Let's, identify our ready-to-drink cocktails, for instance, the canned cocktails in our bottled old fashioned. That sort of carved another little pocket in the market for us. And so it certainly hasn't really seemed to be like more locations or more volume so much as it has been more slices of the market overall that has been the thing that's been most successful for us.
What do you see the future of Backwards Distillery? Do you see growth in the next 5 years? Is it more that organic, you might want to say slow, but just organic, steady, sustainable growth? What do you see here in 2030?
Yeah, I think we would likely continue on that path. I do think I've alluded to tasting rooms being very important to us, and so I think continuing to cultivate that. We have 2 tasting room licenses that we're allowed in the state. Right now we've got our one downtown and then the one still up at the production facility in Mills. So making more use of that second license is, I think, on our to-do list now that really the tasting room downtown feels stable. It was an interesting time to move that tasting room. We moved late 2019, so we only had 10 months before we shut down for COVID, and so then kind of COVID and then the recovery from COVID, and now it's, we sort of see a steady operation down there, and so looking at, okay, how do we continue to refine that, and also look at how we take that second license and make it work for our business as well. And so I think that's the conversation we're having now, and thinking about those tasting rooms are critical to us, as it's where we have the most control and sort of autonomy and ability to showcase ourselves. And so thinking about how do we take that to the next level, I think is the next step for us.
Got it. That's something else I want to get into is transition to talk about city council as well. A lot of people know you from that, that role that you have. Some people might or might not know you have a business, but some people know that you're definitely very vocal about what's happening here in city, in Casper, but also what's happening in Cheyenne. So I want to just talk about that for a little bit. I'm sure that your business background obviously probably, I would assume, it influences why you do what you do. But what motivated you to actually get in city council? Because I was speaking with Kyle a while back, is like, you really need some motivation because you take a lot of heat from a lot of local people that disagree with you or just don't fully understand why you do what you do.
Sure. Yeah, it's twofold, I think, for me. One, I got into politics through the business because it is a highly regulated industry, and I spent the first couple of years really pushing for some regulatory relief, predominantly at the state level, for the industry to try to facilitate an environment that would allow this industry to grow in Wyoming. And that was unexpected. I did not get into the industry thinking that would be part of my job necessarily, but we kind of got thrust into it. It became clear early on, like, oh, you're going to have to learn how to advocate for this. You're going to have to learn how processes work. You're going to have to understand the dynamics at play in the political system, because all of the things that we're allowed to do. I mentioned we have 2 tasting rooms available to us. That did not exist when we started. We had 1 available to us, right? And so all of those things take advocacy and take work at the either local or state and even federal, policymaking level in order to create a landscape that is favorable to our industry, or even still not really favorable, but more favorable to our industry. I was involved in the federal effort to reduce our federal excise tax that we pay. We were being taxed at a rate dramatically higher than beer and wine, and especially small beer and wine producers. And that was many years, started well before my time, and we were able to finally get that done and made permanent, and it fundamentally changed our business landscape, right? So it became clear that it was, these things are very important, and having skills in that area is good for my business. And I just kind of liked it. I learned that it's like, oh, I enjoy this. I like talking about things that I'm passionate about. I like seeing what's working and what's not working, and trying to provide input on solutions. And so what started with kind of me doing that on behalf of the business grew into an opportunity. I really think that is when I became politically aware to a large degree, and then started to see in Wyoming some shifting landscape around our political environment, and I started seeing a lot of rhetoric, a lot of dogma, a lot of out-of-state, influence from personalities and individuals, and also PACs and organizations. And from a financial standpoint, our elections started to look really different. And I grew up here, I was born here, and so wanting to preserve sort of some of the values that I think are important to our community, and to contribute to the community in that way. The place that I grew up and where I was operating my business, it just felt important to me to take the skills that I had learned and apply them in a way that I hope is beneficial to my community. So that was the motivation, I would say. But yeah, to your point, it's fun for me in its own way. Some of the time,
Right.
some of the time it's not. It's difficult and it's stressful and it can be, taxing. It's a lot of time. And, obviously there's a sacrifice to be made to give up that time that you could spend doing something else. And so,
Right.
that those were the sort of the other factors that make that exchange worth it for me.
I think there's a path in business where at the beginning when we start a business that we just worry about, staying alive, paying the bills, keeping the lights on, things like that. But after there's a certain point where we realize that if we our biggest advocate for what we do and our success and our growth is ourselves. If we don't stand up for ourselves, if we don't stand up for other businesses, like-minded businesses, no one will, or it's very possible that no one will represent you the way you can represent yourself. So I think getting into local government and having an influence, even maybe on a state level, is highly important for the sustainability of any growing business. So that makes, and I think that's why I advocate for the Chamber of Commerce as well, because there's an advocacy arm for the Chamber of Commerce, but City Council is another one that we if we don't allow our voice to be heard, then it might not ever be heard.
Yeah, that's right. And I think too that, I had a kind of a deep sense that if my community is doing well, my business has a better chance. And if my community is not doing well, my business is going to struggle along with it. And so, just feeling, from that perspective, like everybody is better off if our community is doing well, my business
Right.
included. And so let me see if I can help be a part of that.
I think the frustrating part is that transition of getting involved in people's conversations, because that's where on one hand you take a lot of heat from people that don't agree with you or that are ignorant, truly don't understand certain policy, because we're not taught, but we hear that it's you should avoid the comment section of a lot of posts on Facebook, especially because they're wild sometimes. But that's where you have to live, and that's where Kyle Gamroth, he spends a lot of his time in the comment section. So you got to be really thick-skinned, first of all, but also have a deep motivation to see change, and have that voice of reason, that voice of logic, the voice of that doesn't easily get frustrated, and it's probably not easy.
Yeah, it can be a challenge. I am not easily frustrated, and so I think that does help. And I don't read the comments as much as Kyle does. Kyle does such a good job in there, and he has a fortitude for that is unmatched as far as I'm concerned. So I do weigh in when I feel it's necessary, and I do try to provide information to people. Where I can, but it's a difficult place to live. There's a lot of noise, and so just trying to understand what is noise versus what is genuine that's where I think the challenge comes in.
Absolutely, because some people are truly interested in understanding and progressing that conversation.
Right.
Other people are not.
Yep.
On both sides of the aisle.
Yep.
It's not a right versus left thing. It's just that there are people that are just not interested. And like you said, rhetoric can only go so far.
Yep.
It's another reason why I like these podcasts, because rhetoric only lasts so long. I mean, we have to hear someone speak for more than 30-second sound bites to understand who they really are.
Yeah.
And I'd love to get some of the politicians, especially one day on a federal level, but at least on a state level, into a long form conversation, because then you find out how empty, shallow, or how much they're really convinced that they're what they're trying to push on us is actually going to be helpful. And so I think that the conversation is definitely a true, honest, open conversation does allow ideas and policy to progress.
Right.
How do you balance you have a very trying, or very you're very involved in business. How do you balance your business endeavors and local government? Because it's both can be very tiresome, I think.
Yeah. I like to tell people that I live a very full life. I try to avoid busy, because what does busy really mean, right? I spend my time. I don't have a lot of downtime. I don't have a lot of free time. I spend my time in ways that feel meaningful and productive and fulfilling to me, and so both of these things do rise to that level where I feel good about giving my time to those places. It can be, I think the thing that's most challenging, I think, in a perfect world, if all calendars aligned nicely, the workload is manageable, right? But that's not, the workload is not static in either place, in the business or in city council. Things are seasonal, issues flare up, it just, and, sometimes those things shift in a way that, they both elevate at the same time, and that's when things get sticky and hairy. And I've got, I'm fortunate to have staff at my business that do a great job and keep that rolling forward. My business partners that do a great job and are able to keep those things rolling forward for those times when sort of the intensity increases in both places. Fortunately, it often works out and it works okay. But one thing that I'm really passionate about, and when I first got into city council, when people ask like, well, how do you have the time? I'm like, well, for me, people have to have the time to do this job, right? We don't only want people in there who aren't running businesses or who don't have young children or who, just people who are retired or independently wealthy or, whatever. To me, that we're not doing our community a service if those are the only folks who can, who have time to do this or can find time to do this. And so, I think part of it is finding the time. And I think most people probably could find 10 or 12 hours a week if they prioritize that, right?
Agreed.
And making sure that the job is structured such that it is possible for a normal person to do alongside all of the other obligations that people have in their lives. And so, I've rolled that around a lot, especially, in earlier work that I've done trying to get younger people involved. It's a hard thing for people with young families at home and that sort of thing. And, anything that I can do or we can do to set policy or structure our system such that it better facilitates those folks being able to participate, and people like me who have, our own small businesses. I think those are things that are worthy of consideration. These are voices we want at the table.
Has your approach to economic development for the city, has it changed or been adapted because of your experience as, growing your own business?
I think my experience has definitely informed my philosophy on that, as well as years spent on the Advanced Casper board and, a few other things even before I got on city council. I think certainly from a regulatory landscape environment, I experienced firsthand how important it is to have regulators you can work with, people, systems in place that are clear, so that people can follow them and, do it right the first time, so that, that avoids frustration and expense down the road. And so trying to make sure that the city is attentive to those things and from that standpoint is pro-business. People say pro-business and it's like, well, what does that mean to you exactly? Right. For me, pro-business, one element of that would be, are your regulating bodies consistent? Are they clear? Is it easy as possible to navigate, the requirements, that sort of thing? I think that, and especially, we had no idea what we were doing when we started our company. And so we really had a strange path to figuring out who is regulating us and what do they need from us and, what do we need to do? And it took a while to kind of get in the swing of that. And so finding ways to just make that easy for people, I think, is important. Finding ways to reduce costs, anything that's overly cumbersome and doesn't really result in a meaningful impact to the project, I think is stuff that I'm always interested in entertaining. So yeah, I think some of that personal experience and some of what I know to be frustrations and tripping points in running a business and starting a business help me have that perspective when I'm working on city council.
What do you think are the the unique challenges that Casper is facing that you're trying to work through as a city council person?
I don't know if any of the challenges that we're facing are particularly unique. I feel like many of them are, relatively universal. Dealing with angst around the economy, dealing with homeless population, folks who have our difficult financial situations, mental health issues. I mean, I think those are just sort of part and parcel of our society right now.
Right.
They're certainly coming up a lot at city council as they manifest in, negative ways in our community. I think something that does feel a little unique, I don't know if it's unique just to us, but certainly at this point in time, is the relationship with the legislature, which I think we're going to get into. But
Right.
that challenge to sort of, from my seat right now, feeling like folks who were also elected from this same piece of Wyoming have a very different line of thinking about our community and about how we should function as a community. So it feels like the support that we've, it's felt more like a partnership in the past, and that there was a shared sense of what needs to happen at the state level and the local level for things to work well and to be in harmony. That's feels like a gap right now, and so to me that feels a little bit unique and is not something that I've seen and been accustomed to like working with in my time on city council. So,
well, let's get into that a little bit. I think this is what's happening in Cheyenne. I think needs to be addressed by all of us, those on city council, but we all have a voice, and I think what's happening down there is definitely affecting all of us.
Yeah.
So, in the broad strokes, what are your thoughts about what's happening currently in the legislative session that's happening in Cheyenne?
So broad strokes, I would say it feels chaotic, which is not something I think most people want from their government. It feels like there is a information gap when it comes to local government and how local government operates and functions, and how we are funded, and a variety, all the things that are very important to actually running a functional local government. It doesn't seem like either there's a lack of understanding or a lack of concern about that, which is equally concerning to me, whichever one it is. Feels, to your point earlier, a lot of this feels like a bit shallow, and there's not enough substance to really, to me, say like, oh, here's the vision. I understand it. I see where we're going. I see how A leads to B, which leads to a better situation for our state or our community. To me, that is missing. I feel like I see A, and that's it. Like, that's sort of as far as the conversation has gotten about, okay, well, then what? Like, what does that do, big picture, to our state budget or to our local budgets, or to people's individual financial circumstances? It feels to me very like instant gratification, kind of low level stuff, when really these are complex systems and they have to be dealt with some amount of nuance, and I'm not seeing a lot of nuance right now.
Right, and that goes back to the whole the point on rhetoric.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of things that people are talking about right now in Cheyenne, and what we're hearing is that they're discussing property tax reduction. They're talking about sales tax reduction. They're talking about limiting and inhibiting local government's ability to raise funds and to use those funds. On the surface level, and again going back to these sound bites, it sounds good. Pay less taxes.
Sure.
Why not?
Yep.
And so that's why a lot of people will gravitate toward that, because we want less taxes. We want a smaller government. I mean, if I could be a libertarian, I probably would be, but it's a wasted vote, unfortunately. So that's those are great concepts or great ideas. But you're absolutely right. Taking that sound bite and then looking at point A to point B and how it's going to affect all the families in Casper is a whole nother conversation. So how do you understand what's happening specifically to those points of property tax, sales tax, and local government?
Well, to my point earlier, to me it's still very chaotic. So it's hard to understand exactly, because there's so many ideas and versions and shades of the same thing on the table, and so quantifying the impact has been difficult. But various forms of property tax reduction, in inevitably will be affecting local budgets, special districts, hospitals, weed and pest, public safety is impacted, the schools are impacted, right? So pulling that lever changes the landscape for everybody who operates on property taxes, which incidentally is not the state, right? The state is pulling that lever, but it's not their revenue that will be impacted. It's all of the downstream revenues that are impacted at the local level. And so, to me, that's an example of if you're going to pull a lever that dramatically impacts everybody else's budget, you need to be an expert on those budgets and how they work in order to understand, is this an acceptable thing to do or not? And I think what you're seeing is everybody who actually manages those budgets telling you it's not. Kind of everybody. I mean, you've got commissioners, you've got city council people, you've got superintendents, you've got law enforcement, you've got sort of folks across the gamut saying, you're not the one looking at this budget. You're looking at the state budget, right? And so your revenues remain intact. That's handy for you to be able to make your budget work, right? But by doing this, and it's something we have little control over, you impact everybody else's budget that operates at a government or even quasi-governmental level downstream. And so, that's one example. You mentioned sales tax as well. And I think that's what's even more disconcerting about this is the fact that it feels very, let's just see what we can get through. Let's see what sticks without consideration for the cumulative effect. I have yet to see good information about, okay, if we select option A, B, and Z, here's the dollar amount that everybody can expect, to feel. Or if it's a different mix of these proposals, then what's that effect, right? And so I think everybody's just sort of holding their breath until we get to the end of the session to see what actually passed. And to me, there's not a lot of holistic look at, okay, is this really, have we gone too far? Is this too much? Is this too little? It just sort of is, well, we're going to see if we can see what we can pass, and then we'll deal with it from there. But ultimately they won't be the ones to deal with it, right? Because it's money that flows to local communities. So,
but the danger of holding your breath till the very end is that once they pass those laws, or those policies, those bills, then it's too late.
Yep.
It's too late, and so that's why being a voice is important. I know that we're gonna delve into the realm of hypotheses and speculation, but because we don't know exactly what they're trying to accomplish yet, because there hasn't been a full thought process that's been shared. Yeah. What are the consequences? Because it sounds good on the surface to reduce our property tax or eliminate our property tax. What would that look like if we would become a state that does not have property tax?
So it would affect different elements differently. That's one of the nuances and one of the complexities, right? Not every local city or town's budget is made up of the same mix of revenue. Casper's, I don't know, maybe somewhere between 10 and 15% is coming from property tax. You've got other municipalities that are significantly more heavily funded by property tax. They don't generate sales tax to the same degree that we do here in this county. They may not have a 5th cent sales tax. They may not have a spec tax. So all of those things, each entity is affected differently. There are some things that are funded pretty much exclusively by property tax, so those things would be affected most dramatically. Particularly with the elimination, you would be looking at then eliminating hospital districts. You would be looking at eliminating the senior service district that we just created here in this community, right? There would be no mechanism for money to flow into those things because it is coming from a property tax mill. So it would be, every community would be impacted. There would be varying degrees. The schools would be impacted. Rural hospitals would be impacted, right? So it would be wide-reaching. It would be dramatic. I think even 50% is dramatic. I don't think there's a world where people don't notice. I think the impact would be significant enough that we're not talking about trimming a little fat here or there. Right? We're talking about lopping off a limb. Right? These are not unnoticeable changes that would need to happen in order to accommodate those reductions in revenue. So, and I think the thing that is a myth that circulates in Wyoming is that our taxes should be lower than they already are. And I would just push back on anybody who thinks that, to say, look at the budget, look at what we pay, and try to write those things in your mind, right? Like in my estimation, looking at, I see our budget, I see our needs, I see the state budget, I see the state needs. I think we're underfunding stuff. We are not overfunding, right? We are underfunding. We look at our infrastructure, right? Look at some of these things that were in better shape when I grew up here than they are today. And a pattern of sort of underfunding. Look at state infrastructure, highways, right? I think that, you know, there's a myth that it's like, oh, there's all this government spending, all this government waste. And I would say, you know, I know that people can point to anecdotal bits of this little thing or this little thing, but on the whole, I don't think that's accurate. And I think that you can just look at, you know, the data that tells us, like, in what shape are our basic needs, right? Our facilities and our infrastructure and that sort of thing. And, you know, things are getting old and things are not being replaced the way that they need to be. And so I would suggest that we actually, over many, many years, have been underinvesting in our communities. And that's not just because we have low taxes, though I think that contributes. But I think that, you know, there's various other policies that have happened at the state level and local levels that have influenced that as well. But, you know, I really think that this myth that we can somehow further reduce our taxes when we already enjoy basically the lowest tax burden in the country is, I mean, at some point you just can't go any lower, right? Like,
right.
we can't cut further.
Right. That's what I was going to mention, is that comparatively, because I've lived in other states as well, comparatively, Wyoming has one of the lowest tax rates, if not the lowest tax rates on different fronts. And whether it's sales tax or whether it's property tax, it's just, and I don't think that even as a nation, we can afford to, for example, our education system, we cannot at this juncture underfund education. On the contrary, yes, we need to, you know, revamp the whole philosophy behind education and become a leader, you know, worldwide in terms of the quality of education. But underfunding it is not the answer. It's not getting rid of the funding that's going to solve the problem, because teachers are definitely underpaid. The curriculum is not as developed as it should be, and so our children, you know, bear the brunt of that, and then our future bears the brunt of that, because those students today, they'll be in the workforce in 10, 15 years. And they need to be competitive on every level, not just business. Yeah. I was speaking with Joanne True, who's another voice that people should, you know, listen to online. When she does, kind of like you, when you do voice something, it's definitely worth the read to read what you say. And she mentioned a few months back, she said, people are afraid of taxes in general, but it's our local taxes that we shouldn't be afraid of. Federal taxes are different, and it's debatable, and that's a whole nother conversation. But our local taxes affect us locally, and if we underfund those, then we have direct consequences.
Yeah, and I should caveat, when I talk about government and government budgets, I'm sort of excluding the federal government,
right,
because I know a lot less about it. I've really tried to focus my efforts on, like, what's happening at the state level and the local level, because of what you just said, because it's where I have influence, it's where it affects me the most. And so I think, you know, conflating those things is not necessarily a reasonable thing to do, because I think that, you know, particularly when you look at the scope of, you know, what we're talking about, budget there, you know, the federal government runs a deficit, the state government and local governments don't. You know, they're structured very differently, and you know, I So I think that's an important distinction to make.
Do you have any alternatives that you would propose, or is the issue, like you said a couple of minutes ago, the fact that we don't have all the information yet, and it's unfortunate because they're going to draw those decisions at the end of the legislative session without us fully understanding. Is there something else we could propose, or is it unfortunate that we don't have that opportunity? How do you see that in alternatives to these problems?
So I think there's a couple problems that are trying to be solved. I mean, I think legislature is trying to provide property tax relief to homeowners. I think that there's, wrapped in that is what I sort of said before is, I think that people in Wyoming have too extreme of an anti-tax view, right? I think we need to be comfortable with taking care of our stuff, right? I don't like the notion of saying like, well, because I didn't want to pay, now the next generation, and the next generation after that have a bigger bill to foot because everything is falling apart around them. Like, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to commit to taking care of the things that we have and making sure that our community is nice. From what I hear from constituents, people want to live in a nice community. So this notion that like, oh, we don't need that or we don't need that, it doesn't comport with what I typically hear from folks, right? I do think that by and large, people want things that make life in Casper nice, right? And I think that they don't want us to be too extravagant about it, and I can certainly understand that, and I agree. But I think this sort of draconian, bare bones, sort of mentality is actually not in alignment with what most people are looking for in their community. So that's sort of the first, I think, discrepancy that kind of needs to be attended to in that conversation. But then also, if we take property tax specifically for an example, I think, they're trying to solve an issue that was really created by an inconsistency in the market, right? The market experienced something that was out of the ordinary, and it caused an unusual thing to happen with some people's property taxes, not everybody's property tax. So, a nuanced approach, right? I think some of the things they did last session to focus on, folks with low income or folks with on a fixed income, where an increase in property tax is not easy to absorb. It's not really reasonable to expect a senior who's lived in their home for 40 years to be like, well, just downsize at this point in your life. I think that there's some merit there, and there's some conversation worth having there, I think. And I think they did address some of those things in a more targeted way last session. But I think, I would take the approach of like, let's figure out how we stabilize the market. Let's not try to just, whack taxes in half so that, the revenue streams are all thrown out of whack, right? Let's understand, why did people's property taxes go up in the first place? And it was, a variety of circumstances, COVID certainly being one of them. Folks moving here, cost of living rising other places, and somebody in a more expensive housing market able to come in here and pay over market cash for our limited home supply, which is creating pressure on the housing market. We don't have enough stock. To me, like the state could deal with that. They could say, well, how do we create policy that disincentivizes people to scoop up homes in our neighborhoods and use them for Airbnbs, for instance, or if that's going to be a disruption to the housing market, right? How do we make sure that people who are buying their second and third homes in Wyoming are attended to versus how our, single one home families, that are living in their properties are attended to? Like, how do we ensure that houses are affordable to build here so that they're affordable to buy here in a way that we can create a market that is not artificially inflated, right? Like, I think all of those things would, in a more natural way, stabilize the housing market so that we aren't seeing home values artificially inflated, right? And so, and keep revenues intact along the way,
right? And
also help us solve some of the pinch that people are feeling in terms of being able to get into a house. So, I think there there are alternatives. I think they're attacking a symptom. They're not attacking the problem.
Right.
And I think they are positioned to attack the problem. But I think that's hard. It's a longer process. And it's not as, to your point, you can't film it and put it in a soundbite and throw it on your campaign page.
Yeah.
And, so those are, despite the fact that it might be a much better solution that solves many problems without creating the damaging impacts that we would see through this approach that they're taking. But that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of collaboration. And I just don't see that being the approach right now.
Right. That's what my last question would be. Are you looking for more of a dialogue between state legislators and local government? It looks like it's not happening.
Yeah. I mean, I think that local leaders should be treated as the experts that they are on their own local budgets.
Mm-hmm.
And that has a lot of value in this state at state level policy making, because local governments are afforded very little autonomy when it comes to revenue, when it comes to how do we raise revenue, how can we influence our own revenue picture. It's like running a business where I have responsibility for all the expenses, but no authority over how we make revenue and what the revenue coming in looks like. So if I wanted to in Casper and I said, hey, like, we've got all these expenses that need attention, I got to get some more money so that I can attend to these things. In my business, I would say, all right, well, how do we drive more revenue here? What can I do to make sure we've got enough revenue in to deal with the expenses that we have? It doesn't work that way in the city government. The state pretty much holds all the cards outside of a few limited mechanisms that we have. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, if they're going to hold all the power and all the authority there, they have the responsibility then to make sure that they are listening carefully to the people who have the responsibility of the expenses, which is us, and which is, our county commissioners and our, school boards and all those other entities that bear the responsibility of the expenses and the impact of those expenses, and but don't get the privilege of having the authority to change how revenue looks. So in that arrangement, we're really relying heavily on them to understand what we do, to understand how we do it. And I don't think that effort's been made, if I'm being candid.
Right, right. If you could say one thing to the listeners, that they're listening to this podcast, and there's thousands of people that are tuning in, which is still amazing to me, which is awesome. What would you say? What would you say to them about potentially getting involved? Or
since we're talking so much about budgets right now, I think that's a really underappreciated part of what happens at city council. It's a part that we don't get a ton of correspondence on. We don't get a ton of public comment on. And so as we begin the process this go around, Casper just won an award for exemplary budget presentation, which is, I think, a testament to the accessibility of the budget for the public. So it's accessible, it's explained well, it's laid out in a way that you can understand. So I'd really encourage folks to tune in to our budget conversations, which happen over not just the passage of the budget, but it starts months before that, when we're going to be capital planning soon. We're going to be talking about our new priority-based budgeting system coming up soon. And so as we do those things, that's a great juncture to tune in, to really get a more detailed understanding of what happens. Is once we pass the budget, really the rest of the year is just executing the budget that we passed. And so I would really encourage people to get involved in our budget process so that you can understand why so many local entities are reacting the way they're reacting to what the state legislature is doing.
Okay.
If you already have that understanding, now's the time to be talking to state legislators about, why these things will be harmful to our communities and what you value about your community that is only facilitated by adequate revenue coming in. And so, it's I guess a homework assignment. It's not. I kind of, as much as the next person, am not in love with spreadsheets, and I do think our priority-based budgeting system will make it easier both for me and for everybody else to kind of understand what we do and the cost of those things. But I would say now is a great time to start tuning in a little bit to those conversations. It's much easier for me to tune into the work session. Obviously, I tune in, I'm there, but I think it would be much easier for the public to tune into the work session to hear the conversation about it rather than just trying to look at the budget itself and make heads or tails of it. So tune in for the conversation and get a sense then of the detail that goes into it, the process by which it's arrived at, and then if you already believe what we're saying about, hey, like this is gonna be bad for our community if some of these things pass, you can find your local legislators on wyoledge.gov, and you can call them, you can email them, you can let them know like this is a bad idea for Casper and for other communities.
Right. Your city council meetings are live streamed.
Yes, they are.
So if you wanted to tune into that or be there in person, when does that take place?
So our meetings are Tuesday evenings. The first and third Tuesday of the month are our business meetings. That's where we take votes. But I would suggest for this conversation, the more detailed and in-depth conversation will be happening in the work sessions, which are the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month, also live streamed. And in our recent remodel of City Hall, we put a lot more seating into the work session room, so it's actually much more friendly to the public, which I'm very excited about. So work sessions are really where the meat happens, right? And so they're not opportunities for public to weigh in those meetings, but they are the place where all of the discourse and the dialogue really takes place for the most part. So, take a look at the agendas and determine, but you could be looking for things like our capital plan. That's would be everything we want to build in the next year. That gets put through on its own process. You could be looking for anything dealing with priority-based budgeting, goal setting, strategic planning. That all feeds into the budget as well. And then the budget presentation, which happens in a work session as well. So there'll be several junctures that are all going to feed into what ends up being the ultimate budget for the next fiscal year.
Got it. Okay. So the workshop rooms are very welcoming, but not as welcoming as the tasting room.
That's right. Yeah.
So give us the address for the tasting rooms and your hours of operation.
Sure. It's 214 South Walcott, downtown by the parking garage, and our hours of operation are Wednesday through Saturday from 3 to 10, and Sundays from 2 to 6.
Okay. And when is the distillery ever open?
Just sort of by request for special events and for tours and that sort of thing. So we don't do regular tours out there anymore, but for groups and things like that, if you've got a group that wants to come in, we set those things up regularly. So.
Got it. I have to make my request because I haven't done a tour yet. So,
good.
Amber, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back in a couple weeks. Thank you.